Hey again, everyone. Welcome into our latest edition of Ohio State Buckeyes Live on National Signing Day, albeit not what it used to be, certainly for the last 4 years, as we will explain soon. But most of you know, about 90+% of the players signed back in December. But we will talk about the loose ends concerning Ohio State personnel and the coaching changes of the past week. We got Kevin Noon on the line from Rivals, Buckeye Grove, still awaiting Tony Grudeman, Buckeye Scoop, and of course, Steve Hellwagon from Bucknuts. Kevin, you're the lone man.
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't here last week, so I guess I'm having to pay penance by being solo here right now. But yeah, it's not the type of signing day that we're used to. We knew that the early signing period would certainly take a cut into what signing day had become, but I don't think that the NC2A, when they put this early period in, really believed that we were going to see 90+% of players signing at that early period. I know I didn't, because I didn't believe that the early period truly was all that early, with it being in December. I always thought if they were going to do an early period, it needed to be before the start of their season. But, just give the NC2A a year, 3, they'll figure out another way to screw it up.
Well, you know recruiting about as well as anybody. So let me nail you down on some of these things, because I didn't know what to expect either. I thought, okay, there's an early signing period, but these student athletes will have another few months to wait until the standard signing period. That's always been the big national holiday for college football fans, first February, Wednesday of February, what it would do. But it hit home that first year, bam, 85% of the top 300 to 500 signed, and it's only inched its way up since then. Do you think it's the driving force is mainly that these athletes are tired of the process, tired of being bothered, and they've made their decision, and so why not get it done?
Yeah, if you're locked into a decision and you're not going to move, why wait? Why drag it out? I always thought when they put an early signing period in, it might not help some kids, because you end up with a situation where you had a lot of programs, especially in the Southeast, code word SEC or whatever, that might not really start their recruiting until December. And they would go and look at kids that were committed to maybe smaller programs than what it is that they have, and then would go and poach these guys. So you would have, with this early period, you'd have these programs trying to lock these guys in, not allow them to have a chance to really blow up, and then, in the 11th hour, up and go to an SEC school, maybe a Southeastern ACC school or whatever, and then leave these smaller programs, holding the bag with nothing left at that point. So now it's just a case of, with just the amount of contact that's out there and everything else, I'm not surprised that all these kids want to sit there and just say, to hell with this. I just want to end the process right now, and are signing early. And I don't see really any benefit at this point to drag it on if you're at peace with where it is you're deciding to go. Unless you're really trying to shop and see if maybe something bigger comes on. But it's always like the thing of, a lot of schools say, if you look, we look. And, if they find out that you're not necessarily serious about your commitment, they're not going to, it's too big of a business. They're not going to sit there and wait for you and let you, figure out if this is what you want to do. Maybe yes, no. When we see coaches out there getting, 1, 2, 3 year run before they're, living that sweet, sweet buyout life.
Welcome in, Steve. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Can you hear me?
We got you.
Okay. I was having some technical issues on this end. We had a press conference going on, and the two programs were not compatible with one another. One was overriding the other. So I had to dump out of that. I've got that being covered by one of my associates, and so now I'm here. So
beautiful. Well, yeah. It's good to know, Steve, that you've got your priorities in order.
Yes, MarkRogersTV comes first, and then the press conference that I get paid to cover goes second.
Absolutely. So that would be a great time for us to remind everyone that the Super Chat's available. So if you enjoy what you hear concerning Ohio State football from these guys and Tony Grudeman each and every week, please leave your contributions there on the Super Chat. And we'll talk Ohio State recruiting, although, as Kevin has outlined, there's not a whole lot on the home front. The couple things I'll set you guys up with is there was a lot of excitement concerning Rajon Davis. He had interest in LSU. He's a homeboy from Southern California who, of course, had committed to USC. He made the 2 trips to Columbus here in the last few weeks, so there was some excitement there. That's a done deal. Rajon Davis is signed with USC. Then, as Kevin has alluded to, JT Tuimoloau out of Washington, of course, the number 1 rated player in the country, depending on your service, but certainly a top 5 player, defensive end there in the upper Northwest. Just a tremendous talent, sought after there. Washington, Oregon, Alabama, also in the running. Hard commit to Ohio State, but has yet to sign. That's making people nervous. And so, do you think we can read anything into this, Steve?
Well, I just think that he's taking his time and wants to weigh his options. And I think, above all else, has not had a chance to take an official visit to Ohio State. As it stands now, the NCAA moratorium on travel for prospects to visit places on official visits, and for college staffs to welcome players inside their buildings on unofficial visits, and for staff members to recruit off campus. It's all closed right now because of the pandemic, and has been all the way back to the middle of March last season. So it'll be over a year. There'll be a moratorium on all that stuff, so you don't hear of anybody going on official visits. What some players like Rajon Davis did is pay their own way to come to Columbus and take a self-guided tour, or find people locally who can show them around, perhaps another recruit or somebody like that. But staff, their hands are kind of tied by the NCAA rules dictating the pandemic, and I think it is a exposure type thing. They don't want to exposure to the virus, but also exposure legally, I think, for these colleges to bring people onto their campus and pay for their visits or whatever, and possibly get them infected with COVID-19 in the process, if there would be some type of legal exposure within that, which they don't want, obviously, to be on the hook for. So I guess we're going to wait it out for a while until a few more people get vaccinated. And then, like everything else, hopefully by mid-year, there'll be some movement to where we have a larger percentage of our population that have been vaccinated, to where it is safe, 1, to take these kind of campus visits, but 2, that we can start putting people back into our stadiums in a safe and orderly fashion without having these risks so prevalent. So I think we're moving toward that slowly, one day at a time, but it's going to be a while, it sounds like. So Coach Day today in his comments brought up the plans for spring, which, as I looked at the calendar, would have them starting practice about March 22nd for 4 weeks, leading up to a possible spring game on April the 17th. What wasn't said, obviously, and that's not a concrete date or anything just yet. They're kind of playing with that as the tentative right now. What isn't said is, will there be fans at that game? And I know that that's an eager thing for everybody out there. Can I get to this game? Can I get to this spring game? Can I see these quarterbacks in person? Can I get there? Am I going to be able to see this? And I know everybody's anxious to get us to that date, but as it stands right now, I think it's completely premature to predict that fans would even be allowed, maybe other than just the families, would be allowed to attend a spring game in mid-April. So it's still 2.5 months away. So a lot of uncertainty out there, but I think, going back to JT, I think that that's what he's holding out for, is a chance, either officially or unofficially, to come to Columbus, check out Ohio State. It's kind of hard to commit and sign with the school without ever having visited. And yet that's kind of where we are. Coach Day today in his comments said that what he noticed from the incoming freshmen who arrived last week is that they're a very close-knit group, and that some of them, had become good friends via Zoom meetings without ever having met each other in person, and that when he sat down at lunch with them, they were kind of cutting up as if they'd known each other for years. And I guess that's a good thing, is that they're really starting to build those bonds. So a lot of ground covered there, just kind of where we're at in this whole process. We're not on third base headed for home just yet with this thing. We are still, I think we're still running down the first baseline, but we're getting there one day at a time.
All right. Steve has asked for questions. So questions we have, we'll line them up and get your take on all of this. So the Rod Favre was jumping right on the Rajon Davis situation, and with him opting to go to USC, Toe is a linebacker who played at Tennessee this past season, outstanding SEC linebacker. I don't know if there's any thoughts about or any news out there about him having interest in Ohio State, but Kevin, Rod Favre basically just asking how this affects the linebacker position.
Well, I mean, I don't know if anybody really was ready to move Davis into Ohio State's column at this point, and I do believe that there is some interest in looking at transfer portal type of linebackers, but you have to make sure it's the right fit. You got to make sure you don't run off your room or anything like that by bringing somebody in. That's what makes it Justin Fields. That's what makes it Jonah Jackson, a Trey Sermon, guys like that, so important for what Ohio State's been able to do in terms of going through the portal. When it comes to, and I'm just really so bad with these Polynesian names, when it comes to Henry To'o from Tennessee, I know I'd heard people attaching him potentially being interested in Ohio State, but I always felt that he was going to end up going back out west. There's another Polynesian linebacker out of USC that seems to be in the portal. I've seen Ohio State attached to him a little bit. I mean, I think that if I had to sit there and put up a hot board of the chances of any transfers coming over to Ohio State, he would probably be in my number one position. We can't be talking about the linebacker position without people wanting to talk about defensive back as well. And everybody wanted to talk about Elias Ricks and whether or not he would leave LSU to go to Ohio State. That seems to have cooled a little bit, but things happen. And what we're seeing in terms of portal transfers, kids are entering the portal and declaring somewhere, almost within the same day in some instances. So it's going to move pretty quick when it happens, or if it happens. I don't know if I see Ricks ending up at Ohio State, but I certainly think Ohio State, led by Mark Pantoni in terms of monitoring the portal, are doing a good job of seeing who's out there, reaching out when they can, and just trying to find the right fit, because the worst thing you could do is think that you're making a good 1-year stopgap move and create a 2 or 3 year bubble because you go about it a wrong way and you don't bring the right guy in, whether it's a culture fit, positional fit, or any of that.
Oh, we lost you, Steve.
There I am. I'm back. Had to mute myself for a moment there. Kevin covered a lot of what I'm thinking about this. And again, culture fit is very important with this staff. They hit a home run with Trey Sermon. They hit a home run last year with Jonah Jackson. Those guys, Antoine Jackson, to me, seems like he's got the potential to be that kind of an impact guy maybe this year at defensive tackle as a fifth year coming back. So they want people who are going to be productive and part of the solution, not create problems. And that's what they've gotten so far when they've taken transfers. I think when you look at the linebacker core and you blow out your top 4 contributors there, Browning, Borland, Werner, and Hilliard, and you have nobody with any real great experience. I mean, you've got some guys that with Gant and Taraja Mitchell, Kevon Pope, and possibly Craig Young, who saw some action this past year, that could be difference maker type guys. But if there was ever a position that's calling out for a guy who started at a Power 5 school for a year or two and done a couple positive things in his football career and would be kind of a plug and play type guy at middle linebacker or one of the outside linebacker spots, this would be that instance. And so by not signing Rajon Davis, and in my count, as we talked about last week, was 83 scholarships, potentially they could find a spot maybe for a transfer linebacker if the right situation presented itself. Unfortunately, the guy that you brought up from Tennessee doesn't seem like he would be that guy. So, again, I think there'll be a lot of movement. The NCAA has not approved the free one-time transfer rule just yet, which I think was totally disingenuous on their part to get to the precipice of approving that rule in January at their convention and then backing away from it because Congress wanted them to take a step back on name, image, and likeness. I don't think one instance had anything to do with the other. And yet they used it as, in my opinion, an excuse to back away from the one-time transfer rule. I can't understand why they did, if they were part of the same piece of legislation or what. But to my way of thinking, that rule needed to go into effect in January. As Coach Day thought today, it could go into effect now, perhaps in May. And when that happens, it's going to be World's Fair on guys changing colleges at the end of the semester. So there's still time on the aftermarket out there. Just keep your eyes and ears open.
Just to jump in on there too, and I think that it's going to be important if we see college football get back to a traditional spring practice, spring game or whatnot. Ohio State for sure, but everybody's going to have some conversations if you're going to have with this 1 year of eligibility coming back for a lot of players. I think you're going to see a huge glut on the transfer market at that point, because guys are going to realize not only are they not starters, they're not necessarily in the 2 deep or even 3 deep, and I think we're going to see a lot of guys moving. Now, that doesn't necessarily help Ohio State in terms of bringing guys in, but I think we could see Ohio State seeing some guys leaving because of just getting recruited over. When you look at what this 21 class is, what the 20 class is, I think we're going to see a lot more attrition, more so than just some of the names that we've seen go into the portal for Ohio State who have been former walk-ons, and then Mookie Cooper, of course, who's now at Missouri.
Rod Farva asking about Greg Madison stepping down. And so let's set everybody up with where we stand on the defensive side of the ball and the coaching staff. Parker Fleming has been elevated to special teams coordinator. Matt Barnes moves over as secondary coach. And so I guess we'll start with you, Kevin, in regards to the defensive coaching staff. So number one question for me is, the defensive staff is set, correct?
It's set, but we could see a defensive analyst or 2 maybe come in, and that was something that Ryan Day was asked about this morning. And it's something that he said that he certainly has been evaluating. And as I read between the lines, I absolutely expect a new defensive analyst to come in and kind of be a fresh set of eyes. Not necessarily, he can't be one of those 10 on-field recruiting type of coaches or whatnot, but we've seen Alabama certainly run through its fair share of analysts, former head coaches and those types of guys. And I think that that's where we're going to be, but we're not necessarily, they're at 10. So, it's not going to be a case of where we're going to see anybody who's going to come in at this point and be one of these on-field type of coaches at this point. Kerry Combs now is no longer saddled with a position, so to speak. I still expect him to work with the corners a good amount, but he's going to be more in that Greg Madison rover type of position, to where he can kind of work with all units on the defense with Matt Barnes listed as a secondary coach. But, I don't think you bring in somebody with Kerry Combs' record and not let him spend a good amount of time with the corners.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Kerry will still be spending a lot of time in one-on-ones down there, grading the corners on every rep and correcting mistakes. It seems to me like Barnes is going to be involved in overseeing all of the defensive backs. It sounds like Parker Fleming, who seems to be a very bright young kid. I say kid, that's probably not a bright young mind, I guess. Yeah, younger than me. I think they're all younger than me by this point, other than Combs, but and Larry Johnson, of course. But I think that I just had a weird feeling that Day's the first head coach they've had who's younger than me as well. But at any rate, I just think that Fleming is going to be involved in that secondary as well. And so Barnes will be kind of the one voice overall for that group. And I think it does allow Combs to work closer with Al Washington with the linebackers and Larry Johnson with the defensive line to kind of build that synergy of the whole thing as a whole. And I guess they're going to take that as it is. And my feeling, Kerry Combs has had 1 year, and I think he's on the clock. I think you get a second year to show that maybe the first year was not how it's going to be in a typical year going forward. And obviously, Coach Day pointed out they didn't have spring football. The preseason was messed up. They only played 6, 7, 8 games, whatever it was. The guys were banged up, COVID, people out with COVID, especially for the championship game. So there were a lot of variables involved to explain why it didn't operate at full strength, really for much more than a game or two all season. But the message has been kind of sent that we got to get this fixed, and we got to get it fixed now, because we can't abide this in the future, and we're not going to lose out on national championship opportunities because one of our units is substandard. So they've recruited at such a high level. Only thing I will say, I say they've recruited at such a high level, but you look at these classes, and most years, if they sign 24 guys, let's say, what we've usually seen is like 13, 14 of them are blue chippers on offense, and then 9 or 10 of them are okay to good blue chippers on defense. It's like it's become the offense has overshadowed the defense in terms of recruiting at times, it seems, at Ohio State, and they've got to start getting those national top 20 guys, top 50 guys on defense to come to Ohio State. And they've had them, obviously. They've had them in the past with the Bosa brothers and so on and so forth. It's just, maybe the talent level is not necessarily up where it has been in years past on that side of the ball, or the numbers or whatever. But maybe I'm picking nits on that. But when you become known as an offensive first program, as they have the last 3 years, that's kind of where things sometimes skew a little bit when your head coach is so focused, so laser focused on got to get me, the shiniest, neatest wide receivers, and they take 4 of them a year, which, seems a little bit overkill at times. What's left for them to fill spots on the defensive side. But that's a minor complaint, I think, in this whole thing. Just something that's kind of been in the back of my head for a while. But otherwise, I do think Kerry Combs going to do a fine job this year. I think it's going to work out just fine. It's just getting from point A to point B is going to be the journey for them.
But if you sit there and you look at this class, I think that they are going to have the opportunity to have a couple of their highest rated recruits will be on the defensive side. Obviously, you already have Jack Sawyer, who signed and on campus. Rivals had him as a 5-star top 20 type player. You have Ja'Kalen Johnson, or J.K. Johnson, the defensive back out of St. Louis. Rivals had him as a 6.0 Rivals rating, which means generally like a top 50 type of guy. And then, of course, we've already kind of talked about that guy out in Washington State. And if they're able to bring him in, that's going to be a big deal as well. That's going to give them another top 10 type of player on the defensive line. But maybe they just haven't necessarily had the depth in terms of these can't-miss blue chippers coming right out of high school. Obviously I did mention J.K. Johnson. I think you look at guys like Jordan Hancock and Denzel Burke, and they're they may be criminally underrated, at least on Rivals. I think they might be a little lower than they should be. My ranking, so I can say that on them. But I do agree that maybe they haven't necessarily had maybe some of the depth in terms of these top-end guys on defense, because Ohio State's identity over the last couple of years, especially under Ryan Day, has been an offensive one. And when you have, you look at future classes, you look at Quinn Ewers, who's the number 1 overall player in the country, a quarterback out of South Lake Carroll, Texas. You already have him. You've already got him surrounded with, more offensive talent in that class. Ohio State's certainly trending well with some 23 quarterbacks right now. So, it's certainly not anything I would have ever expected to see if I were to go back to my undergraduate years from 89 to 94, 5. I took the slow route through college. I never would have seen Ohio State being some sort of offensive juggernaut, and yet here we are.
Point well taken, no question about that. Ohio State rolling on the offensive side of the ball in particular when it comes to recruiting. So do you both think that the defensive secondary issues in 2020 were the perfect storm of you lose all that NFL talent, top-end NFL talent, you suffer a key defection because of legal issues, Amir Reeb in particular, during the offseason. You have offseason injuries, even for Cam Brown's able to hit the field in particular. Then you have in-season injuries that hit that group as well. Can 2020 be dismissed to a certain extent in the secondary, Steve?
Well, yeah, I think so. I mean, we saw things that we don't generally see out of Ohio State. We saw teams that were able to throw the ball at will. I think some of that was a lack of a consistent pass rush. And I know the numbers may not have looked quite as off in terms of sacks as what maybe they normally do per game. They were, close. But it just was the impression for me that opposing quarterbacks were able to stand back there and pick them apart at times. And, they beat up Trevor Lawrence pretty good, but he also threw for 400 yards. Now, granted, they stopped running the football together. Indiana stopped running the football together. And why would you run the football when you can throw it for 10, 12 yards on every play? So it was kind of a hand in glove type thing that, one thing wasn't working. Why bother even trying it anymore? So I don't know. Again, we can sit here and take the defense apart, and it's so complex these days with everything that happens. You watch a game, and the offenses go to the line of scrimmage at 25 seconds on the play clock, and then they stand there and they look to the sideline for 15 seconds until the play caller gets it in his mind the exact look he wants from the defense, and then they activate, and it's crazy to try and defend something like that. Are they two steps ahead of you with what they've come up with? I mean, I don't know. So it is so sophisticated and so complex that you can't make a value judgment and say, oh, the corners suck. I mean, there's just no one size fits all. The scheme sucks sometimes. The corners suck sometimes. The execution sucks sometimes. I mean, it just, and I'm just trying to bring this down to the lowest level that people understand that there is no one size fits all explanation for why they didn't do very well this past year. And again, I think some of it begins with not a consistent pass rush up front that was impacting the quarterback and making life difficult. Alabama made life difficult on Justin Fields to a degree in the championship game, or at least he thought they were, because he did not play his usual game against Alabama. And that's an example to me where the front has to dictate some things to the offense. And Ohio State's front typically didn't dictate a whole lot to the opposing offense. And that left the corners and the safeties on an island to get, exploited a little bit. So, we can say what we want, but until you put on that all 20 film and know what was called and know what they countered with and know what was countered with that, and then, he slid over here and then he slid there, and, Alabama just did a fabulous job when you watch it on tape, just putting guys in motion and creating mismatches and just, just had too much scheme and too many athletes for Ohio State to contend with it.
Hey, we've got a fresh new topic for you. What's that, Kevin?
I said, hey, welcome, Gerd.
Yes, we got to catch the slacker up to our topics here. We've uncovered a fresh new topic for you, Tony. Secondary issues.
Yes. When I asked Ryan Day about that, because to me, that was the entire story of the Alabama game. They just didn't trust enough guys, and he pretty much admitted that they had to go with the guys they trusted, and they didn't have enough time during the season, enough games to get Ryan Watts and Cameron Martinez and Legend Cavazos up to speed. Cavazos had been injured for so much of the season anyway. Lathan Ransom, they probably would have gotten him even quicker up to speed if they would have had more games, and he came along late. I just think it was just a bad year all around in terms of development, and so to expect too much or to put too much, like, I'm not ready to damn Kerry Combs for the season, because I don't think anybody was going to do much better just because of the losses, the personnel losses. Marcus Hooker at the end, Cameron Brown, losing guys in the recruiting, Taylor Johnson not recruiting when he was at Ohio State. It was a perfect storm of situations that led to them not having nearly enough guys in the secondary, and also some development issues as well, because Josh Proctor, when he, like his freshman year, Damon Arnett was talking about how he reminds him of Marcus Hooker. We never ever saw that. Josh Proctor has never become that guy. Not that he could become the greatest safety in Ohio State history, but he's not even been to the point where he can be the deep safety for the Buckeyes. And so there's development. There's all kinds of issues that Kerry Combs wasn't going to fix in 1 year. And then also not being able to fix everything. I also don't think he is the reason everything was bad. However, we'll find out a whole lot more this year. And Kerry Combs could be an issue this year, or Matt Barnes could be an issue, or because I don't think personnel becomes the problem in 2021 as much as it was in 2020.
I'll just clean up with what everybody else said and say that I kind of agree. I think in some ways that there may have been just some characters who were miscast. I mean, I understand the reason you get Sean Wade back is to move him outside. He was so much better at slot corner, but the problem is you lose Cameron Brown early on, and to kind of go off of what Tony said, there was nobody with sophomore eligibility. I mean, you had 3 freshmen on there, you had 2 seniors and 2 juniors. I mean, there was just this gigantic bubble, and that's one of the biggest things when it comes to recruiting. Everybody wants to go out big game hunting, star hunting. You have to make sure that you fill numbers every single year and you insulate yourself from having these types of situations, because you have an injured Legend Cavazos. You have Cameron Martinez, who's making a move over from offense to defense. You have Watts. I mean, but they're guys who are very short on experience or unable to get experience based on one reason or another. And then you got to dance with the date that brought you. And Ohio State was dealing with 4 guys and then suddenly was dealing with 3 guys to fill 3 spots, because they suddenly weren't going to change to running a 2 safety look on a significant basis. So they were they kind of had to play with the cards that they were dealt. And I think it was the perfect storm of just unfortunate circumstances that led to some of the issues. But I also think that it's going to be, the microscope is going to be on the highest magnification that it can be on at this point. If Ohio State has another subpar pass defense, I don't see things being business as usual come 2022, no matter how good the offense is. And even if the offense is able to carry this team to a 5th Big Ten championship, back into the playoff, and see where things fall after that point.
Yeah, the cards, they played the cards they were dealt, and you can't bluff Alabama.
Jair Brown is roughly a top 15 cornerback out of Westchester, Ohio for the 2022 class. Vinay usually opting to go with Tony as his insider choice. Now going to Kevin. I don't know what
wasn't here.
Screwed up.
I'm taking him over on Twitter. I'm running this guy now. We're boys. So I'm sorry, Gerd. I've moved in here. I've been invited for day drinking. You weren't.
There you go. Well.
Got to watch your back, Tony. All right, Kevin. This one's for you. Everybody else, pipe down. Jair Brown. Vinay has heard that there was a meeting that took place yesterday and that there was a mutual decision made that could result in a decommit.
Well, it's a name that has long been rumored as somebody who's had a bit of a wandering eye. I think when he moved from Louisiana to southwestern Ohio, everybody assumed that kind of locked things in. It certainly has not stopped Jair from posting every single offer that he's received as of late, including the likes of Notre Dame. As for this meeting, I don't want to speculate on things like that. I do let some things that happen in the ether happen in the ether, and then I report on it. Maybe that's the wrong decision. Maybe it's the right decision. It's just a decision I'm comfortable with at this point. But It's going to be a long way to go until either December or February for this signing class, and I'm not exactly convinced that Jair will end up signing with Ohio State. But do I know for a fact that we're on some sort of accelerated timetable? I don't. But nothing would surprise me at this point.
Yeah, I have a couple things on that. First of all, my niece attends Lakota West, so she'll be my inside reporter to find out what's going on down there. The second thing is he's not from Ohio, as we all know. He transferred to Ohio to play for one of the better football programs in the state down there, a big school, Lakota West. They play great competition. And what happened was he went down to Florida, I believe, to participate in a 7-on-7 thing or a camp. And one of our 24/7 people pulled him aside a week or two ago. And I even contacted the reporter when the story was posted that he's entertaining other offers. And they posted that on our site. That's the way the national guys will sometimes do it to get the maximum traction. They can write stories in a bubble and put it on the Rivals homepage or the 24/7 homepage or recruiting message board or whatever. But if they want the real traffic, Kevin knows that you got to put it on the team sites, because that's where that you got to put it where the people are. So what happens is we get these lightning bolts dropped by our national experts every now and then, and our local people are like, whoa, what's going on with this? How come you guys didn't know about this? And I asked him the veracity of this. I said, well, was this something that somebody down there cornered him and said, hey, carrying the water for our college staff in the SEC down there, knowing that they've tried to make entrees to him? And he said, no, quite the contrary. This was something Jair volunteered to me personally that, I'm getting other offers and I'm thinking about looking at them. So I don't have the number of schools of the other schools that he's looking at jotted down right here in front of me, but it is, I think, a possibility that he may take visits elsewhere and so on. When that day comes, obviously, as Tony, we covered that ad infinitum earlier, that we're still in the moratorium. And if and when that day comes, Brown may try and get out and see some other schools. So, yeah, it's possible. And again, we see this every year with Ohio State. They've had guys who were committed midway through their junior year or early in their junior year who never signed with Ohio State. And, you see one or two of them every year, and the names just kind of go by the wayside. And in a couple of years, they pop up on CBS at Auburn or LSU or Florida or somewhere and say, oh, I remember that guy. Yeah, he was committed to Ohio State for 6 months. And then, squirrel, their head got turned and off they went somewhere else. So, just the way of the world, and that's just the way it is. And if he doesn't end up at Ohio State, one guy out of a sea of guys out there, I'm sure they'll find somebody else that'll take that spot.
I know we've seen Jamel Dean and Carlton Davis in the playoffs recently. Those are a couple of old names from the past. Dean, of course, signing with Ohio State before leaving. But I know there was concern maybe in the winter or in the fall with Jair Brown. They saw him in a camp, and he was just didn't look like you would expect a corner to look. But then we had a guy down there for the 7-on-7s and said he looked exactly how you would expect an Ohio State cornerback commit to look in playing defense. And so we'll see where that goes. I know, as Kevin said, he's one of those guys that has been talked about, like almost like he would be recruited over because he hasn't necessarily progressed as you would expect somebody to. But again, it's been a really difficult year for progressing. And so we have to keep that in mind and we'll see where it goes. There are some who will tell you that he's going to decommit. There are some who will tell you that I think he's going to stick. So I'm going to say, I don't know.
We talk Ohio State football here every week with these three, and I learn a ton, take away a ton. I know that all of you do as well. It doesn't get much better than Kevin Noon, Buckeye Grove, Steve Hellwagon, Bucknuts, Tony Grudeman, Buckeye Scoop. So we always appreciate them giving more than an hour to us each and every week. By the time we get things organized and everything else, it's certainly much more than an hour that they've invested into our channel each and every week. So we hope that you guys find value in that and why you wouldn't, I would have no idea. So please, your individual contributions are much appreciated. And yes, I will start blocking off time. I will need to every week to go look for a sponsor in addition to everything else I'm doing. So that's something I will do. But if you can help us out by contacting me at MarkRogersTV, and that means a sponsorship for the channel, the sponsorship for this specific show, whatever the niche is that you have with your particular business or a business that you have a close connection with, that would be phenomenal. All right, Tony, we passed you by in regards to the coaching and really didn't even totally get Kevin and Steve's thoughts concerning the Parker Fleming move to special teams, Matt Barnes to the secondary to take over there, and the way it all shakes out at this point.
Well, I know Dave really, really likes Barnes. I spoke highly of him when he hired him about his experience at Maryland and stepping in a difficult situation when DJ Durkin left and took a leadership role of the Maryland defense. And so has experience not just in the secondary, but linebacker as well in his career. But, we'll see how it goes. I know Day he said he's a big fan of internal hires. Him being an internal hire, you can understand that. The Parker Fleming thing, he's a QC guy that was running much of special teams over the last 3 years. So I think that's just a natural fit. And then this frees up Matt Barnes to help out defensively more and puts more focus on the secondary, which I think we can all agree was an issue last year. And so you've got Kerry Combs. I know Steve mentioned this possibility a week or two ago that maybe Kerry Combs just doesn't have a position to coach. And I'm like, well, that's crazy. Kerry Combs himself would go crazy with no set position to coach. But as Dave put it, like, well, he may grab the linebackers one day, he may grab the corners another day, he may grab the nickels another day. I think he's going to remain busy. But, again, I'm okay with this. I won't die on this hill after 4 weeks of bad defense next year. I just think you can't get super upset about the way the defense was in a pandemic. I know it's not a splash hire by just bringing in Parker Fleming and then moving Matt Barnes over. But I don't think the defense is as bad as it was this year because of, terrible coaching, terrible players. I think things are going to be much better in 2021. We'll see. We'll get a much better readout on who should be fired, who should be cut, who should be, promoted in 2021. And I don't want to put too much stock in how things went in 2020. But again, if there are no improvements in 2021, then boom, you got to go.
Vinay, thank you so much for the super chat contribution. Appreciate that. Vinay stating here that it's a pleasure talking Buckeyes with all of you every week on Twitter and here. Appreciate that, Vinay. Kevin threw something in the chat concerning what in a previous time would just be a nice little addition for anybody that loves to play video games, and that's that EA Sports has welcomed back college football to the fold, and there it would end right there as just being a story that involves people that like to play video games. But in this day and age, when we're on the precipice and a lot has been talked about, and actually we're in a position where I can't see it not happening at some point, the name, the likeness, the image benefiting the student athlete. If we go back to the last EA Sports college football game in 2013, Denard Robinson was on the front of that one, that this is just going to push that conversation into a place where I don't think we can retrieve it. And I don't think that that's a negative. I think it's a good thing, actually. Steve, your thoughts about name, likeness, and image and where it's going and where it should go and how it should be regulated?
Well, that's the topic we could spend hours on probably. I think that something is coming around the bend. We don't know exactly what. And, there'll be people who say, well, as long as we have something that allows there to still be fair competition, and then you'll have people like Jay Billis and other people who say fair competition. There hasn't been fair competition in any of these sports since the late 1800s. I mean, Duke, Kentucky, Kansas, et cetera, North Carolina, get the best basketball players most years, and Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State get the best football players most years, and they spend the most money. Those respective schools spend the most money on those sports, so they typically have the best facilities, best coaches, and best football and best basketball. So, it is what it is, but I think that's an issue that's probably going to require some congressional assistance to get it uniform 50 states wide. That way we don't have schools and athletes in Florida playing under one set of rules and people in California playing under a different set of rules. I'd hate to see that, but it's a can of worms. I think from the EA standpoint, I think there were some developments that were going to be made to where college athletes as a group would be able to collectively bargain one way or the other with an EA Sports to put their name, image, and likeness in those games. I don't know where that's ever come. I know EA Sports in its announcement said it was not banking on that happening. Maybe they're ramping up the game with the idea down the line that once it gets cleared by the NCAA that, okay, now we can put whoever the Justin Fields is of that respective year, we can put CJ Stroud in our game now finally, or whoever. I just use his name as an example more than wanting to play with CJ Stroud. I am not a big video game person. I really haven't been. I went to the arcade when I was a kid and put 25 cents in the machine and played, but I don't sit here playing Call of Duty till 3 a.m. and do things like that. I know people who do, and it is their obsession in life. And we all know people who have loved these EA games and talk about, with cherished memories, all the different things that they've won. I still remember when Kirk Herbstreit was a young pup analyst in the mid 90s. I assume he and Joey stayed up every night till midnight and played their games, and this, that, and talked about it on the radio the next day about how they beat each other in EA Sports or whatever, or Madden or whatever the rage was then. But it's really not my thing. I hope that people get what they want, and I hope that the kids get to enjoy a little bit of money out of it. That's kind of where I'm at on the whole thing. And it should be that way because we have an antiquated notion, and I think this year stripped it away that, college athletics is this. Well, no, college athletics is really the football and basketball kids propping up the rest of the operation, and the rest of the operation really can take the fall off right now while the football kids try and pay the bills. And I think that realization that they were the only sport going for the longest time, and now the other ones are finally starting to get back into it. I think we can dispense with this notion that it's 36 varsity sports all competing in whatever. Sure, that's what it is, but it's because of the gravitas of college football and college basketball that the other 34 sports exist. And I think the sooner we come to grips with that without losing opportunities for females, for cross-country runners, wrestlers, etc. I still want to have all of it, but I think we've got to come to grips with the idea that some of these things are not made like the other.
Well, I'll jump in as somebody who does play these games, and I used to take a day or two off after the game would drop because I would play all night and I wouldn't wait for the roster update to come out. I would sit down and put all the names in, and honestly, that's how I knew every number on the Ohio State roster was from playing the game. And the truth is that we're not going to see a game for the 21 season. Hell, we may not see one for 22. They make it sound like they're starting at like line 1 of coding. So there's a long way to go for name, image, and likeness to happen. And you can write a lot of code between now and the point that you get to recording announcer tracks and things along those lines. We see on Madden that we can go in and have weekly updates based on what's happening in the NFL. They certainly, if we get to a point where name, image, likeness is figured out, that they can set all of that up. But, I think it's a great opportunity. Honestly, and we don't even ask the kids about this because the game has been gone for so long, but we would year in and year out how important is having that game and having the ability to play the game as yourself to you? And these kids want it in the worst way. We saw Joe Burrow come out and tweet yesterday that all he ever wanted was to be on the cover of the game. And, he's out of college football, and lo and behold, they've announced the game. But, again, truth be told, we could be a couple of years out. I do think that they will kind of figure out the name, image, likeness type of situation. I think they're going to have to find a non-political way to do it because, those idiots in Washington screw up a picnic. They're morons out there. So I have little faith. I saw a certain senator come out and write the most non-logical response to what was going on, and I'm going to hashtag stick to sports, but I don't want those idiots getting involved in this video game system. But I'm very excited about this, and the rate things are going, I may finally have a PlayStation 5 by 2023 when this game could potentially drop.
I see everybody saying, now I got to go get my PlayStation 5 or Xbox One XS, whatever, and thing is, it's like it'll probably be PlayStation 6 by the time the game comes out, and you'll have to go re-up again. But I'm in the several times we've heard players talk about it offhand. It's always been, I wish I had a chance to be in the game. It's never while the game was happening did I ever hear any player at Ohio State saying, I feel like I'm being taken advantage of. And you never heard that, and I don't know that anybody ever felt that way. I think. You don't even need name, image, and likeness of players to make this game happen because it is so editable. Like you don't, and I don't know why I don't even know why EA has gone away from it, because again, like you can name everybody Joe Schmo in the original game, and then people will just come in and put all of the rosters in for you. You let the users do it. You don't have to do it. But if they want to go ahead and do it themselves, now you're talking. I know the settlement was about $900 a season that you were in a game for players, thereabouts, from some of the people I've talked to. So you raise it up to $1,000. They pay players $1,000 a year to be in the game. That's like $85,000 a team just for the players, which comes out to about $11 million a year for all of the teams basically. And then you divide that by the $60 or whatever that it's going to cost, and they'd have to sell like 180,000 copies to break even just for the players, when they probably sell, tens of millions, 20s of millions of these copies of the game. So even paying the players a little bit, they're still going to make a killing. And, I have no idea what this is going to look like in terms of name, image, and likeness. I know Gene Smith talked a year and a half ago about Ohio State being very well set up to just have a line of businesses who it's going to be very seamless, I think, for players to make money from it. I don't know if it's going to be just sign your name. Yes, I'll take some of this. Yes, I'll take some of this. Okay, I'll sign up for some of this. It's like, the old school Wheel of Fortune, where at the end, you're picking, okay, I'll take the couch. I'll take the Sony television. That I wonder if that's what it's going to be like for the players. Like, okay, I'll do a car dealership. I will do Canes. I will do this one, and then I'll do this one. But I think there has to be a limit. I think you have to limit what guys can do, what guys can make, because then you start getting into cheating. If you've got T-Town menswear, it's like, we'll go $1 million, and nobody else is going to go $1 million. Now you're getting into the shady stuff. Or if all of the churches in Auburn, Alabama are saying, somehow we'll give $450,000 to this one guy, then to come and endorse our church. You can't do that. So I think there has to be some limits. I don't know that who limits that. Is it the NCAA? Yeah. Who tells the NCAA how to limit it? Hopefully, like, just ADs and stuff and presidents get involved, and you don't necessarily need the federal government to do it, but you're going to need somebody to say, okay, here's the cap, because it will go crazy if you don't have a cap, because rich people can't not give money to college football players, college basketball players, if it will help their program be better than the rival.
No doubt. That's their way of helping. Hey, I helped put that kid on the field down there. See him. I helped us get him. They can tell their buddy as they sit up in the club, area and sip their mixed drink. And the thing is at what point does it become anti-competitive beyond the fact that it's already anti-competitive? As I outlined, a few minutes ago, that Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State have all the advantages already. And, and you bring up, well, they play a MAC team. It's not even a real game, 9 times out of 10. Now, of course, when Ball State beats Northwestern, tell those kids from Ball State that they didn't beat a Big Ten team, but, whatever. Kevin was bringing up the coding, and I had the vision in my mind, that you used to see on ESPN would do those documentaries where you have the guy in the spider suit with the electrodes, and they're checking all of his body movements and all that so they can put it in the game. And then, you've got Herb Street and Fowler doing the voiceovers and, all this other stuff. Boy, oh boy, here we go again. Here we go. It's coming back. And, people waiting up. And as my son said, nobody goes to GameStop anymore at midnight. It just comes on your computer as a download, and that's how it's all transmitted anymore. So I don't know. We're headed into some different times. I'll just say that. And the status quo is not going to be what works going forward. And yet I've been around this. Really, I went to college in 1986. And even back then, they were talking about how can we pay the players? The players should be paid, whatever. And as I said, they just shine them on. Every 2-3 years, the names change and the topic continues. Boy, we got to figure out a way to pay these players. And they smile and they nod. Yeah, one of these days we're going to figure out a way to pay these players, and just shine them on till the next group. And that's how it's always been. And until it's settled, that's how it will continue to be.
When Kevin, you were saying how you'd get the game and you do the rosters, I would do the same thing. First thing you do is you start editing stuff. Although I will say the first thing I do with the new game, I will go into settings and I will turn targeting off.
The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to allow Clay Travis to veto any coach hire. And I'm also going to turn on Tennessee recruiting, which means bags of McDonald's cash.
Have it your way, baby.
Allegedly. A true McDouble. And
this thing's gone off the rails, Mark. I don't know.
That's all right.
They're just talking about big dollar figures. For this first game, if they want to sit there and figure out how to pay the players, I know there are a lot of people out there that'd be willing to pay $200, $300, $400 for this game. And I'm just quite – I might be that obsessed too that I would probably pay for the Super Collector's Edition or something if I could find a way to accelerate this timetable and find a PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series 1 X GLS 9 G-Wagon. I certainly would pay up to be able to play this game because I'm not getting any younger and the manual dexterity is starting to go away. And I already have enough built-in excuses. I don't need any more.
And once that rheumatism sets in, you can't get it back.
Oh, good stuff. Good stuff. Yes. Somebody had commented in the live chat that they could see Steve playing his Atari in the 70s and 80s.
I had the ping pong, whatever. Boy, oh boy, was that awful. You go to the arcade and you play Donkey Kong or whatever, and they give you that first one at home, and you're like, boy, this isn't the same, man. These graphics, this sucks. Yeah, it was bad. It took a while till it took probably early 90s till the graphics were any good at all. It was rough there the first decade or so.
I don't know. I played a lot of adventure on my Atari 2600, and yeah, I mean maybe the resolution on that was about as poor as it gets, like an LCD watch or whatever. But I wasted a lot of hours there not learning how to throw a good forward pass or how to do anything else, and that's why I write about sports instead of that and the fact that my genetic makeup was not very good either. But I was much better at playing games than I was at actually going out and playing games.
Like our generation, and you guys are much older than me, but like you look at the 70-inch TVs and everything now where you got to make them big enough for the games. Like I would play my Atari on a 13-inch black and white television, and it was fine. You'd be right up against it, but it was enough to get the job done. And then, you get a Nintendo and it's like, well, you still 13, 20-inch, 27-inch. Couldn't even imagine doing that now. Like a 13-inch television. I don't know, but then you've got your 14-inch laptop screens where you can get it done. But kids today, I'll tell you, spoiled.
Get off my lawn. Cut your hair.
Thank you.
There we go. That should about wrap it up, except we'll take a quick one-liner from everyone to honor our Dalton Moore super chat. Did you guys grow up Ohio State fans? Kevin, how'd that happen?
Actually, I didn't. I'm from the West Coast. I grew up as a USC fan. When I was 16, moved to the East Coast outside of Boston. Still really didn't have a strong collegiate allegiance. I was set to go to Pepperdine. Funny thing happened in terms of the tech bubble bursting, and my dad getting a job in Ohio, and I ended up at Ohio State, and the rest, as they say, is history.
I'd say yes. I grew up in Circleville, 20 miles south of Columbus, and Ohio State was all you really knew. You know, growing up as a kid, it was the pro team in Columbus. Obviously, you didn't have anything else. And you got to watch all the basketball games and 3 of the football games a year. So really, I was probably more in tune with Ohio State basketball really than I was this mythical Ohio State football thing that you could only follow if you listen to the radio for whatever reason. Tony, I can hear you in the back of your head right now saying, television bad, television bad. You know, that's how football embraced television in the 1970s. They did not want to cannibalize the live gate. And think about it, you had people paying $3 and $4 and $5 for these tickets in the 70s, maybe $10 by the end of the 70s. I don't know. And a full house is like $700,000, $800,000, and they didn't want to cannibalize that because they didn't think there was any money in television. Lo and behold, once they turned on the faucet of that television money, they've never stopped it. So it's just gone up and up and up and up and up and up, and really created interest in our sport that we've never could have imagined. I mean, when you think about, we're all full-time employees of websites that cover Ohio State college football is pretty amazing, and with no end in sight. I mean, this is not something where, we see people in other walks of, even within our fraternity of people who cover sports that are losing their jobs or whatever. Doesn't feel or seem like the interest in what we do is going to change anytime soon. And, knock on wood, obviously, for that. Had they not played the 2020 season, maybe that would have impacted some of our livelihoods, but just kind of goes to speak of what the phenomenon is of college football. And, of course, I went to Ohio State as well and got my degree from Ohio State. But at the same time, I feel like none of that stops me or deters me from covering it as zealously as I possibly can. So that's kind of where I'm at today, lo these many years later.
Even in the late 80s and early 90s, Ohio State football, I think, was only allowed to be on TV like 5 times. That was like a national limit because of it just didn't want to, as Steve said, didn't want to eliminate the gate or get into that. Or I think there may have also been like NCAA rules about it's unfair. And so, yeah, I grew up in Northwest Ohio and got to see much more basketball. And plus, in the 80s and 90s, the early 90s, the basketball was better than the football anyway. So that's what we gravitated to. And, I grew up with watching Dennis Hobson and then giving way to Jimmy Jackson. And those were that's a heyday of Ohio State sports for me, was watching. That was the best the Big Ten's ever been as well in basketball, in my opinion, the early 90s. And so that's what I grew up with. And then, went to Ohio State. And as Steve said, when you're covering it and you're watching the sausage get made, the fandom can kind of go to the wayside because you got a job to do, especially in a market that is as competitive as this one. I mean, you can't. It's difficult, but I mean the attention is there and the desire to consume all of it is there as well.
Yeah. Just a quick history lesson for all the young people out there. Up until 1983, the NCAA bargained for all the schools, and you only got a couple of games each week on television, and they'd rotate the top schools. Well, Georgia and a few other schools sued the NCAA and said you were restraining the trade. And so they created a couple other TV packages that came on. But even then, the Big Ten, we didn't get full seasons of games covered until the mid-90s. They had a Raycom local package in Ohio that did like the ESPN Plus games. You had an ESPN package and an ABC package, and that was it. So 3 of the 5 or 6 games each week would be on TV, and the other 2 were, you had to go to the game if you wanted to see it, or like Channel 34 in Columbus would show a replay. The last game Ohio State played, to my recollection, that there was no live television, was 1997. I think it was against Bowling Green or Minnesota, one or the other that year. And our friend Clay Hall got in trouble that Minnesota game. They were showing a very important Penn State Michigan game on ABC that day in the same time slot. And Channel 10 had paid the rights to the Big Ten to show a tape delay of the game at like 10 or 11 o'clock later that night. Well, Clay and his photographer were shooting highlights of the game at Minnesota as it happened, walking out into the parking lot, getting on the satellite truck, and sending them back to the studio. And during station breaks of the Penn State Michigan game, they were showing highlights of what had just happened in the Minnesota game back in Minneapolis. And they dropped a lightning bolt on Clay's head like, "You will stop." Channel 10 saw that pop up on the screen at their studio, and they were like, "No."
And you know who Clay's producer was?
You're killing our tape delay.
You know who's Clay's producer was those days? This guy.
Yeah, you were probably right in the middle of that. But I do remember that. Clay, the SID from Minnesota, came up to Clay and said, "You absolutely will stop this, or you have to leave." And that's where we were in the 90s, man. It was hit or miss. And then obviously with the Big Ten Network in 2007, every game everywhere is on television. Now there's some non-conference basketball that maybe a team will go on the road and it has to be a webcast or something goofy, but ordinarily everything's on TV now.
Well, we were 20 some years away from TikTok or whatever, so we just didn't have ways to broadcast stuff ourselves or whatnot. But in the Big Ten and its infinite wisdom, only sent one team to bowls up through 73. I mean, that great documentary on BTN Tiebreaker or whatever. So, people just can't. I mean, and granted, I was 2 when all that happened, but we're only a couple generations removed from like the great vast wasteland of broadcasting when it comes to collegiate athletics.
I'm pulling up schedules as you guys are talking, because as soon as Tony mentioned that there was only about 5 games broadcast, because my recollection was, like Steve pointed out, about 3 games on, that my first recollection of Ohio State football was me shaking my fist at the TV screen at 6 years old, watching Bo Schembechler get ridden off on his player's shoulders after beating Ohio State in Columbus 22-0 in 1976. And that became my kind of my just staple move for the next 20 years, was shaking my fist within inches of the TV screen when I would get upset with somebody. So Bo Schembechler over the next 15 years became my most hated villain in sports. But it just seemed to me like in 80, 81, maybe 82, 3, 4, 5, in that range, like the floodgates just opened up with all this football. But I'm going back and looking at these schedules because I'm thinking, I remember all these games, but I'm looking at them and I'm trying to, and I can recollect pretty well what games I watched on TV. And Tony, I think you're got it pretty well down to about 5 games there in the late 80s that I'm looking at and thinking of, because I get them mixed up because of what Steve talked about. I would watch them on channel 25, 29, on PBS at midnight that night, and I watch all the games, but I just watched them 8 hours later. So I've got recollection of them all. It was just I watched them, with Paul Warfield doing the color analysis, 8 hours later.
Well, we would watch them in up Northwest Ohio would be on Bowling Green's PBS channel Sunday mornings. So we would watch that, and that's how we had to watch the Minnesota comeback, because we turned it off when it was live the day before in 88, and that was always a classic one.
Yes,
I know one of the ones I'll throw in early 80s. It was a Maryland-Miami game where I think Maryland came back from down 31 points. Frank Reich, I think, was the quarterback. and they beat Miami. And I'm not sure if there was live television for that or not, but USA Network, I recall, was in the college football business for a little while, and they played the replay on like Monday, and everybody had to watch the replay of that game to see how that happened, because you didn't get to see it, I guess, on Saturday. I don't know. Maybe they had their contract was we can do replays, or whatever. But not sure if that was covered live or not. But I do remember that one sticking out as again. It was kind of a wild west once they got that lawsuit, and the NCAA kind of was driven into submission by its members. Had to sue the NCAA to say, look, there's TV money out there. Let us go get it. And the NCAA, was a collection of the members to begin with, and they had to capitulate. I mean, the NCAA president thought he was the commissioner of college sports, and he really wasn't. And I think the guys who have come along in that job now are much more politically savvy to know that I cannot step on the toes of, the Big Ten Conference, the ACC, the SEC, or I won't have this job very long. Now, whereas back then they thought they were running their own fiefdom. So, it kind of, the schools grabbed, that was one of the first times the schools gathered together and grabbed control back from the NCAA and said, no, that was good in the 50s and 60s when we were building the sport. We're selling out our stadiums now. No problem. We need the TV money to pay for a new practice facility and a new library and et cetera. So, yeah, that's where it came to.
Always fun jumping back in time, thinking about all that stuff. I was actually remembering that I don't think NBA Finals games were on live until like 1981. Those would be on after the late local news on your local CBS station.
Nobody cared about the NBA till Larry and Magic and Larry, I guess, to defer to Kevin.
There it is.
Magic has more titles, so.
Yeah, it's Magic and Bird. Yeah, that's the headliner sequence. Kevin Noon, Buckeye Groves, Steve Hellwagon, Bucknuts, 247 Sports, and of course Tony Gerdeman from Buckeye Scoop. These guys are the best. Please join them at their respective sites for further insight into Ohio State football. Guys, it's been good. Appreciate it. See you next week.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
For everybody else, I will be back here at 3:30 talking Mississippi State football. We've got scheduled segments, live streams for the rest of the day talking National Signing Day. So we will see you at 3:30 Eastern.